talk for a few minutes about the Convention of States project, but I wanted to reserve most of the time just to answer questions, because I suspect that many of you have heard about the Convention of States project before. Who here has heard some or knows a little bit about Convention of States? Okay, who here knows a lot about the Convention of States project? All right, that's great. Well, this should be fun then. So first, for my story, I've been told that it's good to draw people in with a story, so I'm going to try to do that. And for the story, I want to take you all back in time to the first battle of the Texas Revolution, the Battle of Gonzales. Is anybody here familiar with the Battle of Gonzales? Okay, well, I'm going to sort of read this little story just to make sure I don't muddle the details of it. So, under the leadership of General Santa Anna, the government of Mexico was transformed into a military dictatorship which ignored the Constitution of 1824. One of Santa Anna's reforms was to reduce the number of the militia to 1 soldier for every 500 inhabitants and to disarm the remainder. But Texans believed that any government that would attempt to disarm its people was despotic, and any people that would submit to that deserved to be slaves. So they weren't really going for that in Texas. On October 2nd, 1835, Colonel Moore led his band of Texans out to meet the forces of this Captain Castaneda, who had been sent to retrieve a cannon that had been given to these Texans in Gonzales for their protection. So he went out to meet Captain Castaneda and made his appeal. You know, we don't want to disarm. We think it's wrong. We think it violates our rights as a people. We want to hold on to the cannon. Thank you very much. So Captain Castaneda stiffly refused that appeal. He insisted that the cannon be returned. And the Texans sadly handed the cannon over. They didn't want it to get scratched after all, like it might if a battle would ensue. And they made their way back to their homes dejected. Well, that's not really how the story went.
Yeah.
Because the Texans weren't about to hand over that cannon. So, what do you think they did?
Started to run and fired it.
Yeah, exactly. They used the cannon. They went to battle. They were willing to do battle with the Mexican army. They used the cannon to protect the cannon. Go ahead, come here. They used the cannon to protect the cannon. And so the reason I wanted to share that story is because that's really what the Convention of States project is about in a constitutional sense. The Convention of States project is about using the Constitution to protect the Constitution. Article 5 is the people's constitutional canon. The Article 5 convention process was put there in order to be a check and balance of the people in the states on the power of Washington, D.C. And so when I've said that before, I've actually had people argue that and say, well, no, it wasn't. Why do you think that? Well, the reason I think it is because I've read James Madison's notes of the convention of 1787 and what he recorded about the history of Article 5. Did you know, and raise your hand if you knew this, that the original version of Article 5 of the Constitution only gave Congress the power to propose amendments to the Constitution? Did you all know that? What happened then was that a Virginian, Colonel George Mason, objected to that version of Article 5. On one of the last days of the Constitutional Convention, he said, that's a really bad idea. because we all know that people in power want more power. And people tend to abuse power and to become power hungry. Power corrupts, right? And absolute power corrupts absolutely. So he said this is not a good idea to have an Article 5 that only lets Congress propose amendments because, and this is what he said, I'm paraphrasing, but this was his argument, what if the federal government becomes too powerful? Then the people will never be able to achieve an amendment that protects and benefits them because Congress will just resist. And so the resolution of that objection that George Mason made was to add this Convention of States process to Article 5. So what it does, Article 5, the final result that we have today in our great Constitution, is that we have two routes for constitutional amendments. Congress can propose amendments, 2/3 of each chamber have to agree, and they can propose amendments that get submitted to the states, and 38 states have to ratify. That's route number one, the route we've always used in the past. Route number two is that 2/3 of the states can apply for a convention to propose amendments. So once 34, 2/3 of the states apply, Congress has a ministerial duty of calling the convention, which means naming the initial time and place for the convention. And then the states, the state legislatures specifically, appoint or name the commissioners to represent them at that convention. And those commissioners go, they represent the states, they get together, they discuss, they deliberate, and they propose, and propose only, amendments to address the specifically named problems in those state applications. What happens then? Do those proposals become part of the Constitution? No. They go back to the states. And just like when Congress does the proposing, 38 states have to ratify any proposal, and it has to be done individually or in seriatim in order for them to become part of the Constitution. So that's the Article 5 process. Now, another thing some people don't realize about Article 5 in its present form is that it was adopted nem con, or without objection, without debate, without dissent. It was adopted unanimously by our founding fathers. They all agreed that this was a good process. And we also know from their writings that the founding fathers wanted this process to be a process that would be used, kind of like the canon. It wasn't just there to look pretty. It was there because they wanted us to be able to use it. Listen to this morning in George Washington's farewell address. He said, if, in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be in any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment in the way which the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation, for through this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good. It is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. So he's talking about the usurpation of power. That's how free governments are destroyed. So, what do you say in this room? Have we had change to the Constitution by means of usurpation of power?
Yeah, oh yes, top level, executive orders.
You're right. That's exactly what has happened to our country. That's what's happened to our Constitution. It's been informally amended time and time again by usurpation. And just a few examples, I already heard one, executive orders. How about the Interstate Commerce Clause? It was originally, the way it was written was to give Congress power to regulate the shipment or transportation of goods across state lines. It's known as the Interstate Commerce Clause. Well, today, how's it used? It's used to give Congress power over anything and everything that might even affect interstate commerce. That's a lot of power that Congress was never meant to have. How about the General Welfare Clause of Article 1? It is interpreted now to give Congress power to tax and to spend for anything it thinks is good for the American people. That's what gave us the individual mandate of the Affordable Care Act, the General Welfare Clause. It was never meant to give that kind of power. So we've had change through usurpation. And one last example I'll give is administrative agencies making law. I mean, come on. The Code of Federal Regulations is like 20 bound volumes. I don't remember how many feet high. They're not 20. It's like maybe 200. It's so huge, and it governs us. These unelected bureaucrats are governing us. That it is wrong. Those powers were never given by the Constitution. So what do we do about it? And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm with the Convention of States project.
Another thing you could have mentioned is the practice of judges passing laws by
Yes.
fiat from the bench.
It's
Instead of
actually-
interpreting the Constitution as according to the ways of the
Yes.
founding fathers intended.
It's actually on my list. I was just skipping it. The Supreme Court has appointed itself the supreme lawmaker in areas like marriage. You know, the Supreme Court was never meant to be a lawmaker. It was never meant to have anything to do with overturning what state constitutions say about marriage. Okay, so back to what do we do about it? The Convention of States project is an effort to trigger this Article 5 convention. It's essentially triggering a meeting of the states, and the topic on which we want to see amendments proposed is limited to 3 areas. So what the application says that we're trying to pass in 34 states to trigger the Article 5 convention is to propose amendments that impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. That's number 1. Limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. That's number 2. And number 3 is to impose term limits. So in order to trigger the Article 5 convention, we have to pass these resolutions in 34 state legislatures. The governor has no power. We don't need a governor's signature. It's just the state legislatures that have to pass it. In the past 3 years, I guess, we've passed in 8 states. So that's how far we've come at this point. We have not yet passed in Virginia. We're working on it. We passed in the House of Delegates last year, but we don't quite have the support we need in the Senate. Yes?
Rita, in Virginia, because I know Scott Lingenfelder is pushing this, how do you get past people like Steve Landis, who's a really nice guy, but obviously has no clue as to what this does or doesn't do?
Yeah. Well,
Do you have like tutorial sessions for these guys, or a meetings guide to Convention of States?
Well, Delegate Landis is my delegate, and I have spent a lot of time with him. And the last time I talked to him about it in depth was last year, and he said, you know, this time next year I might come around. I might be there. I'm not quite there yet. So the way we got around people like Delegate Landis was we got enough votes from other people that we didn't need him. So we passed last year 52-47 in the House. But our real challenge is in the Senate.
Right.
So, you know, I would just say as I close, the federal government's never going to restrain its own power. You know, I'm excited to see what may come out of a Trump administration. I have hopes, but I don't think what we're gonna see at the end of it is a federal government that will never abuse power again. Because even if he wanted to, President Trump cannot overturn precedents set by the Supreme Court that have opened these these huge loopholes. The only way to close the loopholes is through definitive constitutional amendments, and that's what we're looking to do. So we're trying to use the Constitution to defend the Constitution, and just like a canon, a Constitution and the protections it gives are not going to be of any use if we're too afraid to use them. With that, I will take questions. Do I have time for questions? Okay.
With respect to the term limitation amendment that you're seeking to get passed, is that just for Congress, or does that include the federal judiciary?
It could be either. My hope is that it be used to impose term limits on the judiciary. And I think, to give you a practical answer, because my job is to work with state legislators across the country and provide them support and resources and respond to opposition and things. And in talking with state legislators from all different states, there are very few state legislators who support term limits for members of Congress, but many